Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and if you're new to the channel, I appreciate you stopping by and checking it out. What we got going on today is we have two reports. We have a report by a Native American named Roe, and he tells us about a bunch of different cryptids that he has heard about in his area down in the Arizona and New Mexico border. But before that, we have an encounter that happened in the Marble Mountain Wilderness. I already made a video about that location, so I'll leave a link in the description for that one. But a viewer mentioned this BFRO report, told me I should check it out and do a video on it because it correlates with that video I already made in that area, which is a very, very squatchy area. So what I'm going to do is, before I give you each report, I'm going to go ahead and show you these areas where this occurred. That way you guys can keep track while I tell the story. Alright, let's get to it. Okay, so here is the area where the biologist has had his encounter. You guys see where it says Forks of the Salmon right there? That's the town he's talking about. You see where it says Sawyer's Bar right there? You'll hear him talk about that. And this area right there is where the Little North Fork Creek is on, and that's where he lost his lens to his camera the first day. The second day after they found his lens, they traveled past Sawyer's Bar, and they went right here to where the North Fork Salmon River goes by, past Idlewood Campground up here. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how they went up this valley. You see how wild and remote this valley is right here. And they come to this junction and they have to turn left. And they're still going up this way. Up this way. Let me zoom out a little bit for you guys. And you guys can see right in this area is where they had the encounter. Right here. Because eventually they made their way up to this lake right here. The lake that's called Lake of the Island. And you guys see that little island right there. That's why the name of the lake is Lake of the Island, obviously. But this is that area where they had their encounter. Let me back it on out. You guys can see how wild that valley is. So, having showed you guys that area, let me go ahead and get into the story for you guys. You guys can keep track while I tell the story. Let's do it. BFRO Report 5637. Submitted January 2003. Year of incident, summer 1977, Siskiyou County, California. This was summer 1977, and I lived in Arcata, California, working as a volunteer botanist for Six Rivers National Forest. I was helping out a graduate student at Humboldt State University with his master's project. We studied wildlife and plants associated with freshwater ponds in the forest near Willow Creek. One weekend, my girlfriend and I drove up to the Salmon River to go camping. It's a remote area. It seemed that most of the people up there were either miners along the river or fire crews. Near Forks of Salmon, the town, we stopped and camped at a pullout near the mouth of the Little North Fork. The next day, we hiked up the stream, went swimming, even saw a black bear on the trail, and later drove home. The following morning, on a Monday, my coworkers came to pick me up for the week's work. But I realized while packing that I was missing the telephoto lens to my camera. I remembered using it on the Little North Fork photographing a frog. Figuring I had laid it by the stream and forgotten it, I did not join my two coworkers. Instead, I called my girlfriend, told her what had happened, and asked her if she would like to return to the Little North Fork. Instead of roaring up there and back about 100 miles, we decided to make a backpack trip out of it. We got up there, hiked the trail, found the lens, but decided to drive further up the paved road to a spot somewhere near Sawyer's Bar, where a dirt road followed the North Fork and led up to the trailhead where hikers could further follow up the North Fork and into the Marble Mountain Wilderness area. It was dusk, so we donned packs and got up the trail as far as we could before it got completely dark. There were no obvious campsites, so we rolled out our bags and literally slept in the middle of the trail. It's old-growth forest, and we felt pretty alone. The next morning we got hiking again. Following the North Fork up a long forested valley, we passed one other couple that day who had stopped to swim and set up camp. We hiked on another 4 miles and the trail left the river. It snaked up along the side of the canyon and became more of a narrow path. Always the dirt beneath our feet was covered with prints of bears. There were no human shoe prints, just bear prints. It was getting late again, and the topo map indicated that a stream would cross the trail some distance ahead, so we pressed on, figuring to set up camp there. We soon heard water. At the crossing we were very tired and we were ready to drop our packs. We both had a very uneasy feeling about the spot and agreed we couldn't spend the night there. Consulting the map again, we found the trail branched a little ways ahead, and an unmaintained primitive path headed up the mountain to a small subalpine lake that we had earlier planned as our destination. The map showed the creek to cross the primitive trail shortly after the path left the main trail. We figured the trail junction might be a good place to camp since it would be close to the creek, but hopefully without the feeling we experienced here. Soon we got there and found a small open area between the trees just off the trail, level and large enough for our sleeping bags and a fire. We dropped our stuff and then went down the start of the primitive trail to the creek, about 20 to 30 yards. It was in a steep, boulder-choked, densely forested draw full of log jams left from spring or winter torrents. It was barely a creek now in midsummer. It was getting dark, and again we had a bad feeling about being down in the creek bed. We hurriedly filled our cooking pots with water and got back up to our packs. We were tired. After cooking, I remember arranging our pots and pans along a log on one side of us and the fire on the other side. I hoped if a bear entered the camp during the night, he might knock the pots off the log and thereby wake us up. Sometime in the middle of the night, I had no watch, but the fire was completely burned down to ashes and coals. I awoke to a terrible racket going on down in the stream bed through the trees below us. It was a sound of logs and large rocks being hurled crashing into things. I sat up in the dark and listened. I shook my girlfriend and told her to wake up. She at first buried her head in her bag and didn't want to hear the sounds. I was really scared. It was totally dark. I knew there was no one around for miles, and I also knew that bears do not go rampaging around throwing things. I also knew darn well that anything living out there could probably smell the remains of our fire. Whatever it was clearly spending a lot of energy either trying to scare us or angrily searching for something in one of the log jams. After listening for maybe 10 to 20 minutes, it's really hard to know how long, my worst fears were realized. The crashing sound stopped, and soon there was a sound of footsteps coming up the slope directly towards us. It was on 2 feet, and they were clearly audible, heavy footsteps. By this time, my girlfriend was wide awake and sitting up in her bag like me, listening. Although neither of us said it, we both were thinking of what it had to be. With the footsteps came the sound of labored breath. Whatever it had been up to in the stream bed clearly had been hard work. I had a sheath knife, but standing to fight seemed out of the question. It was dark, this thing was big, and I was petrified. Just as it came up behind the trees immediately surrounding us, I flicked on my little flashlight, hoping to keep it at bay with the light. The light did not penetrate the darkness beyond the nearest trunks. The creature stopped just behind the nearest tree trunk, maybe 15 feet away, and just stood there breathing. The sound of the breathing was at least 7 feet up in the air. I yelled, "Hey!" with as loud of a voice as my adrenaline could muster. The breathing paused momentarily, and the creature made a like sound in response. Not to me directly, but more to itself. It was very careful to not reveal itself and used the trees to avoid my light striking him. After this, it turned and walked through the brush and trees directly away from us, not back towards the creek, but parallel with the creek, heading downstream. The stride was unhurried. We quickly built the fire back up and stayed awake until dawn. After the sun came up, we got some sleep finally. After breaking camp, we dropped down to the creek before heading up the path on the other side. I looked around briefly to see if I could see what the creature had been doing, footprints, etc., but I found nothing. I now wish I had gone down or upstream a bit, since the sounds may not have originated at the crossing like I had assumed at the time. We got up to Lake of the Island, kind of a shallow circle lake as I recall, in the afternoon. There were some old campsites there, but no recent evidence of people. The place was scoured of firewood though. I spent a lot of time hauling wood up the hill so we could have enough to last all night. I also stockpiled throwing-sized rocks. That night we couldn't sleep. We would hear rustling in the brush near camp. I would throw rocks in the direction of the sounds, probably just at raccoons or black bears, and build up the fire some more. We did that all night until dawn, when we finally got some sleep. When we awoke, we both decided to bag it and hike out. We packed our bags and hiked all day. The last mile or so to the car we hiked in late dusk. The thought of spending another night out there was just out of the question. We were so paranoid by this time, we jogged the last half mile. That's it for the incident. Although we did not actually see the creature, neither of us have any doubt as to what it was. Up until that point in my life, Bigfoot stories were like the Loch Ness Monster. Something intriguing that you sort of wanted to believe in but could never be sure about. For me, the matter of Bigfoot's existence was resolved that night, 25 years ago. Okay, so the next encounter story is going to be here in Sali, Arizona. Native American Roe has sent in a few encounters with different cryptids, and it all occurs right around Sali. I'll show you in the video all the other places. But I just wanted to show you guys, everybody thinks Arizona is all desert. Look at the forest right there. There's a huge, huge swath of forest for these creatures to be hanging out in. And I'll zoom on in there, and you guys can see, those are all trees, everybody. Not just little bushes. Alright, so there we go. I just wanted to show you guys all the forest right around Sali. As you guys can see, there's a lot of land for this creature to be hanging out in, down in Arizona. Let's get to the story. Hey Willstar, Bigfoot cryptids is something that piques my interest, and I feel like being Native American had just made that interest greater. Growing up, you would hear stories from around here by family, friends, and fellow natives. One that is always in my mind is one about a Sasquatch that was in Sali area long ago. It goes that it was being bad, snatching and eating people in the town. The people knew what it was, so they set out to kill this thing. Once they did, it filled an entire flatbed truck. It is said that if you want the other Bigfoot to know what happened, you must cut up the body and leave pieces of it strung throughout the area to scare others from doing bad. Wow. Another one is in the same place at Sali Lake. My uncle-in-law told me of when he was doing some early morning fishing. He was walking down to the water from his camp and said he saw a large hairy creature on 2 legs washing itself in the lake, but once it found out it was being watched, it ran off. The areas I'm mentioning are very forested with big canyons and mountains. About an hour away, there have been talkings of a very aggressive gorilla man near the many farms area that will attack or kill anything it comes across. There's also many tales of livestock disappearing. One tale I have was of a farmer who was up late and heard some commotion in his barn. He grabbed his gun and went to check it out. When he peeked through the doors, he saw these 2 Bigfoot standing over his horse, with one leg completely torn off. One of them then grabbed another leg and twisted it straight off as well. This made him angry as it was his animal. He raised his gun and shot at one of them. They ran off but soon would come back. The man was terrified and ran back into his home. All night he could hear them talking amongst each other, and they'd be throwing rocks at his house. Another story was of a woman who lived in Kayenta. She was visiting her mother. After she left, she saw this Bigfoot standing amongst the trees. Scared for her elderly mother's safety, she went back and told her. Her mother just chuckled and said that it was a friendly ape man, that it wouldn't do anything to harm them, and how she had left some fruit out for it. My grandma-in-law also believes in these beings and leaves fruit out for them as well. One time she left out a watermelon, and the next morning it had a gigantic bite mark out of it. The Navajo Reservation has many strange cryptids. There's an account from a Navajo Nation police officer who was on patrol late at night on a road between Crown Point and Coyote Canyon, New Mexico. He was driving along, and as he glanced into his side mirror, he saw something chasing. He began to slow down so he could put his spotlight on whatever this thing was. When he did, he saw this very tall creature with a dog's head, legs, and man's upper body. He said the body was absolutely ripped and that not even the biggest bodybuilders could compare to it. It had 5 fingers with long black fingernails, all of them being 3 to 4 inches long. They were sharp, but according to him, they didn't compare to the sharpness of this thing's teeth. After a few seconds of their face-off, the creature ran off into the darkness. My parents happened to live in Coyote Canyon as well. When I asked them if they had anything strange around, they said during the summer they hear strange howls along with taps on the walls and windows. Something that runs along the top of the roof, and even at night when their windows are open for the cool air, they sometimes hear people whispering and talking, but when they go out to look, there is nobody. Until recently, they told me a neighbor of ours has seen these large, strange tracks of something, maybe a Bigfoot, because he also says he's seen a whole family of them that live down in the canyons nearby. My friend's mom told of a time that when she was young and herding sheep with her cousins, this was back in the 80s, I believe, in Navajo, New Mexico. It was beginning to get dusk, so they started herding back towards home. Then they saw this large black cube hovering, passing in the sky. It was covered in lights all around and let off a strange humming noise. It disappeared over the mountains heading north. The same friend had a brother who recounted seeing something in Fort Defiance, Arizona. One morning he went out to smoke and saw a silhouette of something large running along the rooftops of the apartments he lived in at the time. He had curtains, but they weren't very good, so you could see through them a little bit. One night he woke up feeling uneasy and looked at his window. He saw this bipedal dog. He saw its teeth and its eyes. It was just staring at his porch light, almost like it was dazed. Scared him so bad, he put the covers over himself and forced himself back to sleep. This same fella also told of a time when he encountered something. To add context, it was a while ago when he was in a bad place and so was trapped in a bad lifestyle of getting drunk almost daily. He had been partying in Holbrook, Arizona, I believe. He often hitchhiked, so he set out on his way home to Fort Defiance. He eventually was able to get a ride back, but the driver who picked him up was only able to take him to Lupton, Arizona. There was an exit to Lupton right off of I-40. Then you go up Indian Route 12 and will eventually come across the fort. He said it was a stormy night, so it was pitch black on the road. There were some buildings just off the exit. He tried knocking and seeing if it was unlocked so he could find refuge from the weather, but nonetheless, no answer. The only lights were from the cars passing on I-40 at the time, and some light poles from houses off in the distance. He began walking home all the while trying to contact his dad to see if he could pick him up. His dad ended up picking up the phone and said yes. At the time, smartphones were just a thought, so all he had was a flip phone. He then got the idea to use his camera flash to illuminate his path. Then off in the distance he heard tree branches snapping. He began to pick up his pace. After a while it went away, then came back. He began to feel the ground shake whenever this thing ran, meaning it got closer to him. Eventually behind him he heard the sound of this thing's feet splash against the water on the pavement road. He didn't want to turn around and try to look. Instead, he kept on going. But this thing ran right beside him, and he said he felt its fur rub against his arm. At this point, he said he was just trying to keep it together and said he didn't move at all after that and simply waited for it to get him. But it never did. His dad finally came after a while. I know this was a lot, but this is stuff that needs to be talked about. Stay safe out there. The world is a much stranger place than we realize. Row. Okay, so there you folks have it. 2 encounters. One by a wildlife fisheries biologist. Another one sent in by a viewer, a Native American named Ro. We really appreciate that. Thank you for sending that in. So what do you guys think about those stories? And also leave me some comments about what you think about me branching off into doing different kind of cryptids and other kind of mysteries. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to stop doing Bigfoot or Sasquatch encounter stories, that's for sure. So don't worry about that. But I figured I might as well go ahead and start doing something different also, in case anybody wants to hear something else. If you guys like the video, if you're new to the channel, you guys know what to do. I don't even need to tell you. If you guys like these kind of videos, make sure you hit this playlist right here. Always remember, where there is a WILLSTAR, there is definitely a way. And we will talk to you guys later. Take care.